Hello, it's Dawn from Always in Stitches in Noblesville, Indiana. I bet you don't recognize me. Got a haircut. I told you on Monday I was getting a haircut, and here it is, Friday, and it's all gone. So I'm so happy. There's no more hairs in my ears. Well, there might be hair in my ears that I haven't plucked out, but no, I'm just kidding. I don't have hair growing in my ears. But it was tickling my ears and getting me frustrated, and so now I feel more like a human being or a German Shepherd or something, but I just feel so much better. And so I promised you on Monday that I would come back and talk to you about what the difference is between a quarter of a yard and a fat quarter, okay? But I decided I was just going to go one more step and just kind of tell you a little bit about cuts and why do we cut in these odd amounts, okay? All of our yardage is cut by yards. That's kind of funny, don't you think? Our yardage is cut by yards. But anyway, we use 36 inches is a yard of fabric, and we use that kind of as our standard. So a half a yard would be 18 inches and so on and so on. So a quarter of a yard is 9 inches. So 4 nines makes 36, right? So a quarter of 36 is 9 inches. So I'm going to lay my ruler down here, and I'm going to cut 9 inches off. Now, fabric that we carry, unless you're buying large backing fabrics, which is 108 to 120 inches, most all of our fabric is 45 inches wide. Now, we say 45 inches because that's what the manufacturer says on the end of the bolt. But that includes the seam allowance. Not the seam allowance. The, what's the word I want to use?
Salvage.
The salvage. Thank you, Peter. See, Peter is the other part of my brain. The one that doesn't work, Peter fills in.
I'm the sleeper cell.
Yeah, so I'm so thankful to have Peter on the other side of the camera with me. But anyway, the salvage, so it counts the salvage. Well, we can't count the salvage because we're not going to use the salvage. So I like to say that there's about 43 inches. If I'm calculating what I'm going to use in my quilt and I have to have so many 8-inch squares, then I know that I can't multiply 8 into 45. I usually go 43 or 42 depending. I will measure the fabric after I've cut it and cut off the salvage and then measure that to see how much usage I have. But definitely when I'm calculating and writing down how much fabric I need, I'm going to go very, very frugally and say that I'm going to be needing like 43 inches, okay? I hope that made sense. But I've cut off 9 inches. This is a quarter of a yard. So it would be from salvage to salvage. See, I did know what that word was. It's salvage to salvage. So right now it should be 45 inches by 9 inches. So I'm going to spread it out here. So that's a nice long piece of fabric. That's a quarter of a yard. So if you were needing 2.5-inch strips, 2-inch strips, if you were needing strips length to length, salvage to salvage, and a quarter of a yard is all your pattern calls for, that's the way to go, a quarter of a yard. Now I'm going to cut 18 inches, which is a half a yard, because 36 is our measurement, that is a yard, and 18 is half of 36. So I'm going to put my ruler down on the 18. I'm going to take my rotary cutter. I'm going to cut 18 inches. Now that's a half a yard again, like I said, but if I took the fabric and I brought the two salvages up together and made a fold and took my scissors and ran my scissors across that fold, now what's half of a half yard? 1/4 of a yard. So now I got 2 pieces out of my 1/2 yard. So this gives me 1/4 of a yard. Well, now how in the world can this be 1/4 of a yard and this be 1/4 of a yard? It's the same real estate. You get just as much fabric here as you do over here. So this big piece is 1/4 of a yard, and this piece that is long and skinny is 1/4 of a yard. If I were to cut this in half, this big fat one, if I were to cut it in half and lay it end to end, it would be the same as this. So this is why we call this 1/4 of a yard of fabric and this a fat quarter, because it's fatter. See that? I can relate to fatter. So I like the fat one. Now, why would I choose this over this or this over this? Well, depending upon my project. What if I was making a placemat? Now, nobody makes just one placemat, but maybe you're making a candle mat. And it's bigger than 9 inches. Okay? But you didn't need a big long piece. You didn't need to buy a whole 1/2 yard to get your one little mat out of. But your mat is, let's say your mat's 11 or 12 inches. Well, see, you could get a fat quarter. You could get 12 inches because this is now 18 inches by 1/2 the width, which I say is 21, approximately. 21 by 18, where this is 9 by the width of the fabric, which is 43, because we talked about that earlier, right? Okay, so if you're wanting strips, long strips, this would be the way to go. If you were talking about wider pieces, but you just didn't need a whole big bunch of it, the fat quarter's the way to go, okay? It's the same amount of fabric. People have a hard time understanding that this 1/2 yard piece cut in half is the same amount of fabric as this big long 1/4 of a yard. Now what happens if I take this 1/4 of a yard, take my scissors, and cut it in half? I'm taking 1/4 of a yard and I'm folding it in half and I'm cutting it into 2 pieces. Well, what's 1/2 of 1/4 of a yard?
Well, it's not skinny anymore.
It's not skinny anymore, but now it's a fat 1/8, because now it takes 8 of these to make a yard, because I took 1/4 of a yard and, oh man, this is sounding like math. Ooh, we're not going to get into algebra, I promise. Only just basic math. 1/2 of 1/4 of a yard is an 1/8 of a yard. Well, what's a true 1/8 of a yard? This is a fat 1/8. What would be a true 1/8? If you took 8 into 36 inches, you took 36 inches and took an 1/8 into that. 8 into that. That's going to give you 4 1/2. So now I'm going to cut a 4 1/2 inch strip off of my bolt of fabric here. Now I'm doing it exact. You know, when you come to the quilt shop here at Always in Stitches in Noblesville, we always give you extra so that you have a chance to straighten up the edge. When they roll the bolts with the fabric, it's done by hand, and not always is it perfectly straight with the grain of the fabric. So it's important that when you get your fabric, you do straighten it by the grain, and I'll show you how to do that here in a minute. But definitely, we always give you probably about 1 inch to 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch more than what you're paying for, because we know, we're all quilters here, and we know what it's like to get exactly the amount you need, and then it's crooked, and then you have to straighten it up, and no more do you have what you need. So we're always pretty generous here at Always in Stitches. So now, I know it's hard to believe. I know visually, this makes no sense whatsoever, But this big, long, 4.5-inch slice of fabric that is the length of the bolt, the length of the fabric, salvage to salvage, is exactly the same amount of fabric as what's right here. Both of these pieces are the same amount of fabric. Can you see that? Okay, so why would I want to buy the fat one over the skinny one? Again, same process. If you need a wider piece, but you don't need all that length, you would go with a fat eighth instead of a straight eighth off the bolt. Now, I was talking to you about straightening your edge. Let's take another 1/2 inch off. How much is a 1/2 inch? Well, that'd be 18 inches. So let's get up to here to 18 inches.
1/2 inch is 18 inches?
Half of a yard is 18 inches. Is that what I said, a 1/2 inch?
1/2 inch is 18 inches.
Half a yard. Now I'm going to show you how to tell if it's straight with the grain. Okay? You can see that when it comes off the bolt, the salvages are not even. Okay? Sometimes it's that way, sometimes it's even that way. Well, you can tell that that's not straight. That would be, really, really bad if you had it that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to I would press my fabric. I'd press this seam right out of my fabric. First of all, that's the very first thing I would do. The second thing I'd do is I'd bring the salvages together. Okay? And then I'd just let the fabric drop. If I can see that the fabric is laying straight, if the fabric were laying, let me just make it not lay straight. This Motive fabric is excellent because they roll it pretty good. But can you see how crooked that is? Can they see that or not?
Yeah, there's a wrinkle.
There's
a vertical wrinkle.
Yeah, and if you laid it down and you tried to smooth it out, see how it's not going to smooth. It's just not going to work.
It's cattywampus.
It's cattywampus. You are exactly right, Peter. Then you know it's not straight. When you can let it drop and you can move these salvages back and forth. I don't know. I take my fingers and I kind of move one to one side and then move one to the other side until I actually get it to drop perfectly straight. Now you can see, look here, this is where I cut it. It no longer is straight. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. So this means I'm going to have to straighten the edge. Now, the way you straighten the edge is you take your ruler, and you need a 24.5-inch ruler because remember I said half of the width of the fabric is approximately 21. Well, you need a ruler longer than half the width of your fabric so that you can really see the whole ruler goes the whole length of half the fabric, like it comes off the bolt. So now what I'm going to do is, there are lines on my ruler, of course. I'm not going to use the lines on my mat. Okay, I'm going to use the lines on my ruler. This very first line right here, I'm going to line it up with the fold of the fabric. And I'm going to make sure that's nice and straight. So can you see that that's really nice and straight? And then I'm going to go down to the other end, and I'm going to look at this and make sure that it's nice and straight. And look at how nice and straight that is. Then I'm going to scoot it over until, if I cut it off, I get a sliver that has the whole length. See, there's a little bit of that fabric sticking out there and a little bit of that over there. Now, when I cut it, I'm going to walk my fingers down the ruler so it doesn't slip. When I cut it, there's a continuous, should have got a new blade before I started. There's a continuous piece of fabric. Well, there's one that just kind of fell off, but I know that it was on there. So now I know that I have a complete straight edge on this side of the fabric. Okay, and how do I know it's straight? Well, because this line here, this salvage edge, is parallel to my fold. If it were not parallel, let's just show what I mean. Let me make it off a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to put this on my ruler. I'm going to make it straight down here. Perfectly straight on that ruler. See how that line lines right up with that ruler? Now let's come down here and look. Can you see how there's a little bit of blue? Now you may think that that itty bitty bit of blue that's not lined up completely straight with that line would make any difference, but it does. Because if you just keep cutting it, it's just going to get more crooked, more crooked, more crooked, okay? So you have to have those lines parallel with each other to know that you're on the straight of grain and that your fabric is laying perfectly straight. And that's what we call when we say straighten an edge. And if it's not straight when you leave here after it's been cut, that's why you get a little bit of extra, so that you can go home and you can straighten your edge of your fabric and you don't lose too much. This was just an example. This fabric is already so straight on here that when I cut from this folded edge, there was just hardly any. See that? So I think this fabric was rolled on this bolt pretty good and straight. Now, let's talk about fabrics that aren't printed straight on the fabric. Okay? Now you come across that every once in a while when your fabric is directional and the direction is this way and you cut a straight line and you know you have your two parallel lines and they're perfectly lined up, but the pattern goes off. Well, then you're going to have to make a decision. It's going to have to be a decision that is yours and yours alone. It's your quilt. You have to make the decision. Are you going to cut it with the design or are you going to cut it with the grain? If you cut it with the grain, of course you can use your ruler and your rotary cutter. But if you're going to cut it with the design, you're going to have to cut it one layer at a time. You're going to have to open it up. Let's just pretend. You're going to have to open this up. And if the line goes crazy wacky, you're going to have to follow the line with your scissors all the way from salvage to salvage. Does that make sense, Peter?
Is that like when we cut panels? We don't use the rotary cutter. We cut it. We open it up and then cut it.
You have to open it up because it may not be laying on the fabric straight. Correct. And it may not be printed on the fabric straight. A lot of companies, just print a panel willy-nilly and then it's not on the fabric completely straight, because a lot of times on panels, they're such large pieces. Sometimes, though, it's frustrating. I'm just going to be honest with you. Sometimes there are companies that just print them willy-nilly, and it's frustrating to get a panel like that. And when we're ordering panels, we never know. We don't get to really see what they look like on the bolt. We just get to see a little picture of what the panel looks like. And so we're saying, oh, that's a super neat panel. Let's get that in. And then it comes in, and then it's not printed straight on the... So we always cut our panels by the line and not by the grain. Okay? All right, so does that clear up what is a fat quarter versus a quarter of a yard? Does that, in your mind, Peter, do you now realize the difference?
Yeah, I do. Are there times when you're cutting your pieces, are there times that you would stack like your fat quarters, or do you only cut like one layer at a time?
Well, it pretty much would be depending upon what I'm doing. If I'm cutting 6-inch blocks, then I feel comfortable myself. I could cut 4 layers at a time. That's my comfort zone. if I'm doing miniature quilting, no. I'm going to cut 2 layers at a time, maybe even 1 layer at a time, depending upon how small the piece is. Just because the less you stack, the more accuracy you get, okay? Because if you're cutting a big thickness, first of all, you'd need probably a 60 millimeter rotary cutter. If you're doing a stack of 8 layers, I would definitely recommend that you get a bigger rotary cutter. But I'm comfortable cutting 4. But you've got to find your comfort zone. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And then another question I have is, like, say it says I need, 12 or so 6-inch blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way I can manipulate the fabric, turn it, fold it, so that way I can cut less times with the rotary cutter?
Right. Exactly.
Or do you recommend just cutting strips and then cut the strips down?
Okay, remember this was a 9-inch.
Uh-huh.
And originally it was held together. It was one big strip.
Uh-huh.
Remember that?
Uh-huh.
Okay, the first thing you're going to do before you cut it into 6 inches is you're going to cut this salvage off. Get that salvage off of there. The salvage is woven much tighter than the fabric. So by taking off your salvage, you're releasing that fabric and letting it relax, because you don't want this really heavy woven fabric to get in the way of the fabric that just needs to relax. Okay, this is the part that goes on the loom before it gets printed. Okay, so now you've got a straight edge there, okay? So you've made sure that your fabric is straight. You've got a straight edge there. And how many did you need, Peter? 6 inches?
No.
Like
How many?
12?
12? Well, you're not going to get 12 out of a strip, because 12 times 6 is how many? 72. You don't have 72 inches of fabric. You see that? So let's just get as many 6-inch ones as we can out of this 1/4 yard of fabric, okay?
Okay.
All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it in half again. I folded. Now I've got 4 layers, okay? This should, if I had an iron, I would have pressed this. Okay. I'm going to re-straighten my edge just because that would feel more comfortable to me. And I'm going to look to see that that line is parallel to this line right here. If it is, I'm good to go. If it's not, I'd need to straighten it up. Now I've got a straight edge. I'm going to turn the fabric. And this is a 6-inch ruler, so isn't that convenient?
Very convenient.
Uh-huh. If it were, let's say it was a 5-inch ruler, and I didn't own a 6-inch ruler, but I owned a 2-inch ruler. This is a 5-inch ruler. This is a 2-inch ruler. I could set this 2-inch ruler on a 1, add my 5 to it. This way you can use what you have in an emergency.
Well, that's a game changer.
Isn't that
because
something?
When it asks me to cut those 8-inch blocks out, and I
And
don't
you
want to
don't
use
have
my mat, and I don't have a ruler, now
can
that I'm here at the
combine.
quilt shop, I could just buy another ruler and put them together.
Right, or you could buy an 8-inch one. But if you're home like at 3 o'clock in the morning and the quilt shop's not open,
Or it's, yeah,
or it's Sunday,
yeah.
or it's Christmas Day, or it's a day when no quilt shops are open, I'm saying in an emergency.
I love that.
Isn't that cool?
That's genius.
Yes. Okay, it's not me. I mean, it's not my idea.
Why am I just now finding out about
Well,
this?
how long have you been quilting, Peter?
Oh, a couple years.
A couple years to my 26. So in my 26 years, I've come across a lot more people who've quilted than you have, and I've learned from those people.
You got some good hacks.
Yeah, I do. Okay, so here's my straight edge. I'm going to move my ruler over, and I'm going to make sure it's straight on there. But not only am I going to look at this line, I'm also going to look at this line and make sure it's straight. So see how this is straight across, this is straight across, that's straight across, everything's straight. Okay, now I've got 6 inches here. Next time, Peter, we're getting a new blade every time we do a video, okay? All right, now I'm gonna straighten this edge. This is my folded edge down here, okay? This is my loose edge down here. Again, lining it up, making sure. Now I got all 4 layers. I've cut through all 4 layers. This was a fold. No, that's not a fold. I didn't get all 4 layers. Yeah, I did. Okay, I don't know why I did that. So now I've straightened everything out. Look at how square all that is, okay? Awesome, right?
Yes.
Okay, now I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm going to make sure everything is straight. Now I've got 4 6-inch squares.
Nice.
But now.
But wait, there's more.
Wait, there's more. I can open this up kind of gingerly so the fabric's not moving around. And look, I can get 2 more. I can get 2 more. So now we've learned that we can get 6 6-inch squares out of the width of fabric. Isn't that awesome?
That's awesome.
So is that kind of a good tip for how you can get more out?
That was very helpful.
Okay, now there's going to be a lot more cutting tips come January the 19th. Put this on your calendar, January the 19th. We're going to air a video. I hope that's on a Tuesday. I think it's on a Tuesday. Anyway, it's that Tuesday. If the 19th is on a Monday, it'll be the 20th. Whatever that Tuesday is, okay? We're going to air a video, and we're going to start a new project. And that project is called My Favorite Color is Moda. And we're going to do, Peter and I are going to do tutorials on our YouTube page. Always in Stitches. What's our YouTube page, Peter? Just Always in Stitches?
The Always in Stitches one might be in there.
Okay, the one might be in there. But I'm sure if you start typing Always in Stitches, it'll come up.
Yeah.
Right?
All
okay.
of our videos will.
Yeah. So anyway, on YouTube, we're going to be doing tutorials on how to make this quilt. It has 20 blocks. Moda is sponsoring it, so you can also go to the Moda website and look at the quilt. You can go to our website. The quilt is posted. You get 6 different colorways to choose from that we'll have kitted up here. It takes 10 fabrics, 11 total yards of fabric, so they're not all the same amount of fabric. Not all 10 colors are the same amount, but we have the measurements. We have little booklets that you can come in and get with the kits, or you can choose your own and make your own kit. That'll be exciting and fun. And then Peter and I, each month, will be doing a block or 2 and help you through that process of making that quilt. Cappy, the manager of our store, she's going to do hers in blues, and I'm doing mine in greens and pinks. I've almost got it done. I think maybe I'll have it done by the weekend. And so I'm pretty excited about this program. Again, it's called My Favorite Color is Moda, and it's to celebrate Bella Solids. That's what Moda calls their solid fabrics, Bella Solids. And this is their 45th year anniversary for Bella Solids. So it's the year of Bella, we're calling it. And how we're going to celebrate is through this quilt and this project. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be the first time that Peter and I are actually going to do tutorials step by step. And if you want to learn more about cutting and more about how to sew accurately, pin versus not pinning, chain pieces, what is chain piecing, how to organize to make a quilt that takes 20 blocks and they're all different. No 2 blocks are the same. So how am I going to organize all that? And it's just going to be a really fun video. So I hope that you'll come and join us for that. We're really excited. Again, January 19th, if that's on a Tuesday. If it's not, it's the Tuesday closest to that. So you just have to forgive me. I just can't remember all that stuff. But it's going to be fun. So come and join us. Thanks for being with us today. Have a Merry Christmas because it's almost Christmas time and 2020 is almost over. I don't know what that's going to mean for us, but whew, I'm ready for another year, aren't you? Okay, see you later. Bye-bye.
Another year of quilting.
Another year of quilting.